In this hand, we look down at ace-8 of diamonds in early position. Can you go ahead and bump this up?
At the conclusion of this hand, we move over to the biggest game in the room. The room being Best Bet Jacksonville, Florida, which is the location of the most recent World Poker Tour stop. How do you decide? Should you play in the biggest game in the room or maybe a different game? Obviously, bankroll is going to play the biggest determining factor, and if you don't necessarily have a separate bankroll for poker, it's all just going to depend on your expenses, your entertainment budget. Hopefully things go well in poker, sometimes it doesn't. That's the most obvious determining factor as far as which game you're going to play. I think the other determining factor is what are your goals and what do the lineups look like? A lot of times, the second biggest game in the room can often be the most profitable one. The reason being because a lot of times the best players in your card room or in your city, they want to play the biggest game because oftentimes that's where the most money can be made. But if every good player is playing in the highest poker game in the room, then the average win rate in that game is going to plummet. And oftentimes the second biggest game in the room can often be more profitable. All that being said, in the first night at Best Bet Jacksonville, played this one hand of 2-5, which I thought was interesting and wanted to share with you guys. And then we hop into the biggest game in the room, which is 5-5, often 10, uncapped pot limit Omaha.
In this hand, we look down at ace-8 of diamonds in early position. Can you go ahead and bump this up to $20? And we see two callers who have position on us. So three ways to a flop that comes down ace-10-3 with two clubs. Top pair, mediocre kicker versus two opponents out of position. I'm going to check it here, and the two players behind me check as well. Turn is interesting. It's the 8 of clubs, which gives us two pair now. Third club on the board. Definitely going to start betting now. I bet $25. The player on my left calls, and the player on the button folds. So heads up to a river that comes down at total break, offsuit deuce. Gonna fire again here. Expect to have the best two pair holdings. Don't think anyone's gonna have a set. Maybe some stronger hands laying in the weeds, but definitely going for value. I bet $60 before the player on my left thinks for a little bit and goes ahead and raises up to $150. I don't think for too long here. This $60 bet, even though relative to the size of the pot, it's kind of medium, it's not exactly a small bet. And I think it's tough for players to raise versus wagers as a bluff versus bets that are not small. So I don't think he's bluffing here, hardly ever, maybe once in a while. Players in Florida, they like to do some stuff, but I'm gonna go ahead, give him credit here. I make the fold, and my opponent pretty quickly shows me the king, queen of clubs. Nice hand, friendly game, appreciate him showing me, and pretty happy with the way that I played this one. Obviously, if we bet the flop, we're just going to lose more money. Bet folding the river seems like the play here. All right, we're in the biggest game in the room now. That's 5-5 pot limit Omaha. The $10 straddle will be on a lot, and it's an uncapped game. But in this hand in particular, to kick things off, we got a double board bomb pot. We get dealt the ace-5 deuce, and we see two flops in which on the bottom board, we flop top and bottom on ace-10 deuce, and on the top board, just a pair of fives. So even though we've got something to work with on both boards, I'm just going to check it. Doesn't feel quite strong enough to start firing money into. Things change on the turns for sure, as we make a full house on the bottom with a turn deuce, and on the top, we make two pair with the turn ace. Action checks to me. I'm going to start firing here now. I bet $75. The button and the small blind make the call. So three ways heading to the river cards, in which nothing changes for us on the bottom, as that's a 9. And on the top board, we add a full house up there as well, and a river ace. Small blind checks. Of course, we're firing money here. I go ahead and fire out for $350 this time. The button basically snap calls, and the small blind gets out of the way. Rolling over here, two full houses. Chances are that's good, especially when we don't get raised. And sure enough, it is, as my opponent shows 9 deuce for a worse full house. Not sure what else he had going forward. There's just so many cards in these double board PLO bomb pots. It's tough to keep track of all these cards and vlog it as well. But what I do know is that we've got the winner here. We're scooping in a double board bomb pot to kick things off. All right, back to regular pot limit Omaha now, playing four-handed, 5-5-10. And in this hand, the cutoff limps in before we look down at ace-10, 7 deuce, 2 diamonds, and 2 spades. I'm going to go ahead and raise this up, a double suited hand of $50. And all three opponents on the table make the call. So 4 ways to 10-6-4 with 2 diamonds, top pair plus nut flush draw. Action checks to me. We're going to see bet this one, of course. I bet $100. 2 folds, and the cutoff makes the call. The turn is an offsuit 5, which is kind of interesting. We don't improve, the board does connect, but we do have a 7 in our hand. 7 seems like kind of a key card. We have removal to the straights that are possible. So when he checks it over to me, we have a decision that's probably pretty close between firing out as another semi-bluff, trying to get a hand like jacks or queens or kings out of there. Maybe a weak 2 pair like 6-4 or 5-6 has a little bit of a tough decision if we go ahead and bomb it. Could take the free card, but that's boring. I'm gonna go ahead and pot it. And we get some bad news when my opponent jams in his stack. It's not that much relative now to the size of the pot. He's got $540, and we are very much forced to call that. So chances are we're going to need a diamond and only a diamond to improve here. And that is the case. And we don't get that. The river is an offsuit 8. For some reason, he takes forever to show his hand, and sure enough, he's got Jack 9, 8, 7, and he finds the offsuit 5, which is gin for him, and he also finds the perfect opponent to just go ahead and blast into him. When he turns the nuts, we can't get there on the river. Straight's going to win some, lose some. On to the next one, still very much short-handed and straddle on. Action on me on the button, looking down at 10, 9, 8, 7 with 2 hearts. Perfect rundown, single suited. Go ahead and make this $40 before the big blind 3-bets it up to $135. Back over to me, the easiest call in the world. Toss it in, and we go heads up to a flop of King 8 Deuce Rainbow. Big blind continues for $150. We've got a very standard, straightforward call here. We've got middle pair, we've got backdoor straight draws, and a flush draw. Turn is one of the best cards for us as it's the 9 of hearts, giving us 2 pair, plus a flush draw, plus an open ender. So unless my man has pocket kings here, which would be a bit of a cooler, we're going to have the best hand here a lot of the time, especially when my opponent checks it over to me. We're always wagering here. Let's go ahead and bet it for $300 best bet dollars. My opponent thinks for a little bit and makes the call. Off to a river card, which is an offsuit 9, improving us to a full house. How cool is this game? Pot limit Omaha. Start with a beautiful hand like this, flop 1 pair, end up with a boat on the river. My opponent checks. We're not doing that. We're firing money. 4 figures worth of dollars. I bet $1,100 here. Of course, we're looking for a call because if my opponent did have those pocket kings that he was trapping with, I don't think he's just going to check call on the turn. The board is way too dynamic, so we always have the best hands here. My opponent goes well into the tank and thinks for a while before deciding to make the call. Great news. We're going to win a sizable pot here, end up with a full house. Full houses, those are good hands in poker. Subscribe for more tips. Game is a little bit less short-handed now. I think we've got a full table, in fact, and this pot goes massively multi-way in a limp fest. We're in the blinds. We've got ace, jack, 9, 5 double suited. Double suited hands are great, but I think we need a little bit more connectivity in this one if we want to go ahead and raise out of the blinds. So I limp along, and it makes its way over to the straddler, who decides, you know what? He's got something that he wants to raise with. He goes ahead and bumps it up to $70. Something like 4 callers before action is back to me. We're going to be in there as well. We've got a nut suit. I toss in the $70, and we're going 6 ways or so to a flop. You got to love pot limit Omaha. You got to love poker action in Florida. Combine those two. You got yourself a good time. 6 ways to a flop of Jack 5, 4 Rainbow. That's going to give us top 2 pair here. Definitely something to work with. I'm sure in PLO, and especially in these massively multi-way pots, you can do a lot more leading out than you would in No Limit Hold'em, but here I decide to check it. The straddler checks it, but there is some action to be found as the player in the cutoff goes all in for his $135. The player on the button calls very quickly, and it's over to us with a decision, flat call or raise. We're raising here, boys and girls. We go ahead and raise it up to $700. The straddler folds, later saying he had ace, ace, queen, queen, double suited. Over to a short stack player in early position who thinks for a little while before deciding he's going with it. The pot is big enough, offering him a good price to stick his $235 in. And is back over to the button, who once again calls very quickly. Turn is not a great card. It's the 4 of spades. So even though it gives us backdoor flush draw, counterfeits our 2 pair versus potential overpairs or worse 2 pairs even. There's not enough money behind for us to do anything other than wager the rest of the button stack. He's got just under $400, so I drop 4 black chips out over the betting line, and the player on the button is going with it. He doesn't love it. He asked me if I have top set. I say no, I do not. Turns out the player on the button is drawing, and the river coming down another spade is not what he was looking for. It is what we were looking for. Our flopped top 2 pair, rivered backdoor flush, is going to be the best hand in this spot. Nobody shows any better hands, so I think we had the best of it on every street post flop. That's going to be great news. We are going to scoop a big one here. And when you get these kind of runouts and you scoop in these kind of pots in 6-way hands, I don't know how you guys cannot fall in love with Pot Limit Omaha. Just look at all these chips. There's always going to be variance. We lose some hands along the way, of course, and in an uncapped game, it's easy to lose track how much you buy in for when you just plunk some money onto the table. But I do know how much money I brought to the Sunshine State with me, and I do know that we profit this amount of money on day one of our adventures here at Best Bet Jacksonville.
Things go well for us that first night at Best Bet Jacksonville. It's my first time at this casino. We've got ourselves a win. Day two was a ton of fun. We played a meetup game, myself and Brad Owen, and 20 tables of our new friends. Just an incredible turnout, of course. Anytime we go somewhere for the first time, the energy is always, I would say, damn near peaking. And that was surely the case during this meetup game. We had ourselves a great time. We played on stream for a little while, showed off the terrible poker that I usually employ when playing meetup games. And I don't really have too many hands to share, or really any hands to share from that day, because as mentioned, I typically play my D- game when I'm playing meetup game poker, and it's really tough to explain, my thought process. I'm actually just there to gamble and have a good time, to be perfectly honest with you guys. Some people, some poker players, they can never play anything but, their A- game at worst. Me, I'm on the other side. Am I trying to lose money when I go to the poker table? No, I'm trying to win. But when I'm there at a meetup game, I'm trying to have a good time, and I'm splashing around and I am playing D- poker. Anyway, had ourselves a little bit of a loss, not a big one, a small 3-figure loss in the meetup games, but that was recouped when the following day we played a tournament, a small $300 buy-in tournament. It was a bounty tournament, and myself and 10 other bounties in the tournament did a last longer bet. Whoever is the last bounty standing wins 1.5 liters of champagne. This guy collected on that bet. Last bounty standing, send me the bottle of champagne. It still remains to be popped, haven't popped it yet, but we did get on the board in this tournament, ended up cashing it, finishing in the top 20, and promptly bluffed off my chips after that. But anyway, had ourselves a great time, cashed it, won some champagne, and we are back to our winning ways, it seems, in the poker. And the following day, we're hoping that that can continue because we're playing some more Pot Limit Omaha, the 5-5, often 10, sometimes 20, uncapped Pot Limit Omaha, which was not the biggest game that was running this day. I think there was a 10-25 no limit game that was going. That was probably the biggest, but to me, I enjoyed myself the first night in the 5-5 uncapped. Felt like this was gonna be the most profitable game for me. Hopping back into these streets, let's check out some more hands, shall we?
All right, back in the mix here. No straddle on in the early going, and there's an early position raised to $15. The button makes the call, and we look down at Jack, 8-7 with 1 suit. Happily make the call out of the blinds. 3 ways to a flop that comes down 7-5 deuce rainbow. I check it. The initial raiser fires out a C-bet for $35, and the button folds. It's back over to us, and this is a pretty interesting spot here. Calling is totally fine. We have an overpair, and we've also got top pair on the board, but it's tough for our hand to improve since we have a pair in our hand. This is a pretty interesting spot where we can actually turn our hand into a semi-bluff and put a lot of pressure on better overpairs than pocket jacks. So with that in mind, I go ahead and check raise up to $100, doing just that. Not thinking that I have the best hand and just purely raising for value / protection. Maybe that's true once in a while, but I think my opponent is weighted so heavily towards overpairs. And since we have top pair on the board, that blocks top set and 2 pairs. So again, check raising here as a semi-bluff, and my opponent folds pretty quickly here. And what's interesting is later on, she says something to the effect of, I should have slow played that. I should have sucked her in there because she had good aces. It's not a very big pot, but it is a pretty fun one. All right, at this point, we've got ourselves a 7-handed poker game here at Best Bet Jacksonville. And we see the undergun player limp in before the hijack raises it up to $25. Over to us in the small blind, and we've got ace, 10 deuce with 1 suit. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet this because my opponent in the hijack spot is not very deep. In fact, he's quite short. We 3-bet it up to $90, and that player in the hijack makes the call. Flop comes down pretty nice. It's ace, 9-7 with 2 diamonds. That's top set, aka the nuts. We go ahead and fire out $100, and that essentially covers my opponent's stack. He goes ahead, he calls all in, and we're off to the turn and river, but we only need to see the turn card because the turn is an ace. That gives us quads. River is a meaningless 6. It's another small one, but in my opinion, it's another fun one. Quads, always fun. Doesn't matter if it's in the 2-card or the 4-card game. All right, we got the straddle on now, and in this hand, we look down at Ace, Jack, Jack 4, double suited. Very raisable. I go ahead and raise it up to $40, and we see not 1, not 2, but 3 callers. A standard multi-way pot in the Pot Limit Omaha streets. 4 ways to 10, 4, 3 rainbow. Big blind checks, and the straddler leads into me for $100. We're going nowhere with our overpair. We've got a pair on the board. We've got some stuff. I make the call, and everyone else folds. Turn is 8 of hearts, second heart. That does improve us. Adds a flush draw to our overpair. Straddler bets out again, this time for $275. We're going nowhere. Don't think we need to raise. Flat call seems perfectly fine in position. Toss in the 275. Off to a river card, which is an offsuit queen, and my opponent bets $500. And this is once again a pretty interesting spot in the PLO streets. We've got ourselves 2 jacks. That blocks the nuts. And how likely is it that my opponent backed himself into a straight, especially when we've got 2 jacks in our hand? Much more likely that he's got pocket 10s or a 2 pair type holding, leading into me, betting the turn, firing out on the river, and not for a pot size wager here. That gives us a few options here. I think calling is probably the worst of those options. Sure, we block straights. Maybe he'll have some bluffs here, like the 5, 6, 7 type of a wrap. Those kind of hands brick out, but calling seems a little optimistic. Folding seems reasonable. We've just got 1 pair here, but you know what seems more than fun? Raising. Turning our pocket jacks into a bluff. As mentioned, we've blocked the best hands on the board. Let's do that. I go ahead and pot it. My opponent has maybe $800 behind, so it's a little bit sketchy of a situation because we're not that deep and I can't leverage a full pot size raise here on the river. But $800 is $800, people, is it not? My opponent thinks about it for quite a while. We're sweating here. We're thinking fold thoughts, and my opponent does go ahead and finds the fold. So that, my friends, is what I would consider the 3rd fun Pot Limit Omaha hand of the day here. Things going pretty well in the early going. We are up money. We are finding good spots, making good decisions. Everything falling into place so far in PLO. In this hand, we see 3 limpers before there is a raise to $25. We are in the big blind looking down at King, Queen, Jack, 7, King, Queen of diamonds. Let's get in there, toss in the $25 before the first limper goes ahead and back raises now up to $100. There's 1 call back over to us. Did we come all the way to Jacksonville, Florida for the first time in our lives to fold the King, Queen, Jack, 7 to a limp 3-bet for $100 measly dollars? No, my friends. I'm in there, and we are off to a flop. That flop comes down Queen 9-4 with 2 diamonds and 1 spade. I check. That 3-better tosses in 250 best bet bucks. Player in the middle folds. We are going to have to go ahead and stick this money in there. Maybe we can find a call, see a turn card, and go from there, but that seems less fun. Let's go ahead and pot it, realize all of our equity here, stick it in there. My opponent pretty quickly gets his money in there. He's got about $750, and we cover this man. So we are off to see a turn on river. And what's interesting here in Jacksonville is that, yes, you can run it twice, but no one ever seems to ask. It's kind of nice. It's kind of fun. None of this, hey, how many times? You want to go once? Let's go twice. I only go once. Yeah, sure, let's go twice. None of that stuff. Let's stick the money in and see what happens. And what happens is we see the Jack of spades on the turn. That's 2 pair. And we see the Ace of diamonds on the river. That's an even better situation because that, my friends, gives us the nut flush. And that is not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Pot Limit Omaha hands where very fun things have happened. Some very interesting spots here in the PLO streets. So many hands that come up when you're playing this game that are at least somewhat interesting. There's backdoor scenarios. If you guys enjoy a good backdoor scenario, go ahead and click the like button, maybe the subscribe button, maybe leave a comment. Do whatever you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next hand. In this next hand, there's 1 limp, and we look down at Ace, Queen, 9, 8 nut clubs. We are on the button, so let's go ahead and raise. I make it $50, and we see 3 callers. So another 4-way flop heading to Jack, 10, 7 with 2 hearts, which is good news, bad news. Good news in a couple of ways, actually. We flop the nuts here, and we also have a better straight redraw. Bad news, obviously, we don't have any hearts in our hand. So when there's 1 check, a $200 wager, and 1 call, Even though we do have a redraw, I don't think it's going to be strong enough with 2 hearts out there and 0 hearts in our hand to put in a raise. I think we just want to flat call here and see what develops versus 2 opponents. Turn comes down another 7, and that pairs the board, which means no longer do we have the nuts, and our straight redraw could be drawing dead. 2 players check it to me. I'm just going to check this one back, and the river comes down the ace of hearts. So not only does the board pair, but the front door flush arrives here on the river. The 2 players check it to me once again. I'm very happy to show down this straight, which I do when I check it back. But the first player shows down the 9-8 of hearts, and I don't get a glimpse of what other cards he has in his hand. A lot of cards out there, especially versus multiple opponents. But as you can see, my opponent flopped the nuts as well with that flush redraw. So pretty happy with the fact that we do not raise this flop, because of course my opponent is going absolutely nowhere and would have scooped this one with his redraw. We do lose some money in this pot, but pretty happy with it, all things considered. Moving along here, there's always another hand just around the corner. In this hand, the hijack makes it $40 to go. We look down at ace, jack, 9-9, double suited. Maybe we could 3-bet this one. Double suited hands are fun. Plus we have a pair. We got some high cards and connectivity, but I just toss in the call, and there are, I believe, 2 other callers in this hand. Once again, another multi-way flop, and this time it comes down ace, 6-5, 1 diamond, 2 hearts. Flop top pair here, but at the moment, not too much going on for us. Otherwise, action checks to me. I check it, and it checks all the way around. Turn pretty interesting, though. It's 8 of diamonds, 2nd diamond. Now there is 1 check and 1 wager of $150. The initial raiser calls, and it's over to us. Very interesting spot as mentioned. I don't know if we just want to call here. That would definitely be reasonable if we had the nut flush draw, but considering it's just a jack high flush draw, I'm not sure how much that is worth drawing to. Chances are versus 2 opponents, a pair of aces with a jack kicker is not going to be good on this board either. So folding could definitely be a reasonable play. Calling seems very mediocre at best, but once again, I think there's a third option on the table. Given the fact that we have pocket 9s here, that has removal to the strongest hands, and whenever that's the case, that really makes me consider putting in additional aggression in those kinds of spots. What's even better when we do it this time is that we have a backup plan with our flush draw if we happen to get called. So I'm going to go for it here. It worked out great last time. Everything's clicking for me in this Pot Limit Omaha game. Let's go ahead and try it. I go ahead and raise up to $600. If we do get called and the river's a brick, that will leave some money behind in order to put additional pressure on the river. The player who bet out for 150, he gets out of the way, and it's back over to the initial raiser on my right, who goes ahead and pots it, which is not the desired result, obviously. We're just going to have to get out of the way here. We have a bluff that gets called, or even worse, gets raised. We can't continue in this hand with a pair of aces and a jack high flush draw. We're gonna have to let it go. We get a little bit trapped here, assuming my opponent had himself quite the good hand. So sometimes these plays, you look like a genius, and other times they fall quite flat. We lose a handful of other hands, and our profit at this point has quickly drifted away from us. While we were up in the early going in this session, somewhere around $1,300, we are now actually stuck in this session, down a smidge, but being an uncapped game, we go ahead and add on an additional $2,000, and we are still locked in looking to battle. There's always going to be swings in PLO, and we're here to embrace them. In this hand, the straddle is on. There is 1 limp. There is a late position raise up to $50, and we look down at ace, king, queen, queen with 3 hearts. That last attribute, obviously not a great one, but ace, king, queen, queen, that feels pretty strong regardless. I'm going to go ahead and put in a 3-bet. I make it $180 to go from the big blind. The straddler and the limper fold, and the late position raiser makes the call. So heads up to a flop, that comes down pretty favorable. It comes down queen, 7, deuce with 2 clubs. I think we would find a c-bet with a large percentage of our range here on this board. So I'm going to go ahead and fire out for that same bet, $180 again. Very cool news. My opponent does not fold, doesn't call. He wants to go ahead and put in a raise. He raises us up to $700, and with somewhere around $2,500 effective and top set on a position, all that adds up to a very straightforward repot of this hand. We're gonna go ahead and pot it, and my opponent snap gets it in the full stack size. And we've got ourselves an over $5,000 pot here, $2,500 or so effective per person. Not only that, but we get some very, very good news when my opponent tells us that he's got himself a set, which is just about the best possible situation that we could have asked for. Aside from him flopping 2 pair, he's got the next best thing for us. He's got himself a set, and he's only drawing to that 1 out. The turn is an offsuit jack, the river is an offsuit 4, and that is the perfect run out because we've still got the nuts on this board. We showed on the queens, and as mentioned, they just like to run things once around here. Very fast, very efficient, and this is going to be a very efficient and very large, very sizable pot here in a 5-5, often $10 game. Once again, look at the size of this pot and look at all those chips in this pot. That, my friends, is a beautiful sight that is not a rare sight in the PLO streets. We initially buy into this game for $2,500. Things go well early. Things do not go well in the middle stages, but they go very well in the late stages. We add on an additional $2,000 along the way for a total of $4,500. Cash out of this game for $7,830 for a nice little profit, $3,800 and some change.
Obviously, my math was off there when I was doing the voiceover for that little bit. I forgot I was in for $2,500 originally and then added $2K more, $4,500 total, and a profit of $3,330. We add on the $1,300 from the first night of Pot Limit Omaha. I think the meetup game and the bounty tournament was basically a wash, so we've got ourselves a profit of just about $5,000. Now, the winning did not even stop there. We played the main event at Best Bet Jacksonville, in for 1 bullet, 5K buy-in, and we cashed the event. And we got a small pay jump. Cash out of the 5K event at WPT Jacksonville for $10,100. So that's another $5,100 in profit at that event. And that, my friends, is a fun and profitable trip at Best Bet Jacksonville. First time there, made some great memories, made some friends. Love to see it. Guys, I'm in Austin now. I am coming to you from the Ruby Hotel, my favorite hotel in Round Rock, Texas. Gonna be playing some bigger games down here this week. More action to come. If you guys are enjoying it, would love it if you would click the subscribe button. Helps me and it helps you find more videos just like this one. All right, speak to you guys very soon. Cheers.